Welcome back to Architectural Adventures, brought to you by Historic Springfield Society. I'm your host, Kylie, and this is my co-host, Fillmore, here as always. Thanks for joining me as we tour Springfield's architectural curiosities. Today's episode is a little bit personal, and I will give you the backstory to that in a moment. Today we're going to be talking about painted ladies and the colorist movement and what exactly that is. So for a little bit of context here, I initially wanted to do an episode about color selection for your historic home, and I wanted to do a parallel of doing a boutique color scheme or a historically accurate color scheme. And as I began to do research for this episode, it became very apparent that condensing and trying to fit both of those topics into one video was just not going to work. So I decided that it would be fun to just break it up and do two large videos. So look for a future video about color selection for your historic home and historical accuracy sometime in the near future. Now, as I said, this is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and the reason for that is we have to go back to about 2005 to my junior high school art class. We were doing a unit on architecture, and one of the books that was featured was this book right here, which honestly changed my life. So this book was published in 1978, and it was written by Elizabeth Kamada and Michael Larson, and it talks about the colorist movement in San Francisco. So what is that? So in that time period of the late 60s, early 70s, obviously there was a lot of change occurring in our country. And to a lesser extent, you may remember, if you were around for that time, the fact that everywhere the colors were incredibly vivid. This was a time period, especially for interior design and architecture, where color was incredibly important. It was, the ending of the mid-century modern era, but we had very vivid earth tones. And as a result of the hippie counterculture in San Francisco in the late 1960s, we had the rise and the beginning of the painted lady movement. So it was, it's formally called the colorist movement. So the term painted ladies was coined by this book in 1978. And it all began because of one house on Steiner Street that a bunch of hippie artists living in a commune there decided to take a bunch of random paints that they had, and they completely covered this house, this Italianate style home, with all of these vivid colors, and it became known as the hippie house, and many to this day still refer to it as that, even though all of the different vibrant colors are gone, and also the enormous paper mache alligator that they once had hanging from the second story is long gone. But it still retains that moniker to this day, and that was really the start of this movement. So homeowners began to paint their Victorians in San Francisco a lot of very vivid, bright colors that were all contrasting. So the formal definition of a painted lady is a Victorian, well, I say Victorian style, Victorian era home painted in at least 3 contrasting colors. Now, you may be asking about historical accuracy, and we will delve into that more in the upcoming color episode. What I will tell you is that Roger Moss, who is the authority on historically accurate period color schemes in America, detests the colorist movement. And he described in his book, A Century of Color, that these painted ladies are best not transported across state lines. So he says it's fine for places such as Cape May and San Francisco, which are real tourist towns, but it's best not to have this movement spread widely across America. The reality of it is, though, if you do look at plates from that time period advertising color, and if you look at some of Moss's own period color suggestions for that era, the colors are quite vivid. Now, they aren't the level of vivid that perhaps the painted lady movement is, but we do have very rich, deep earth tones. We have lots of terracottas, olive greens, golds, maroons. So the colors were very vivid originally. And there's this misconception that's been a falsehood that has perceived on and on because I think it's our most recent collective memory, because obviously there's no one living that was alive anymore from that original era. And in the mid-century, you had this phase where Victorian era buildings were all painted white. They were all given this flat coat of white paint. Now you may be asking, why was that? There was a multitude of reasons. In all honesty, Victorian architecture at that time was seen as outdated and it was no longer popular. So in a way, covering the entire building in one color of white made it monochromatic, and it made the details all disappear. It made the building seem more mid-century and more modern looking if everything was one solid color. So that is really where the all-white Victorian comes from, and that is definitely not historically accurate. I hate to break everyone's hearts, but buildings of that era, you may have had farmhouses that were painted all white, but overall, buildings definitely had a multitude of colors, and the colors were often used to accentuate the architecture, and that's another tenet of painted ladies. So the color selection is done in a way to bring forth all of the details and to best highlight the details. So for example, on a Queen Anne style home, you'll have details that are carved and applied woodwork such as fans and sunbursts, and sometimes they'll be given gold leaf, or they'll be given various colors to pull this detail out, or you'll have all of the millwork and fretwork painted different colors. One detail that I love, which I actually incorporated on my own home, is when you have a turned spindle balustrade and you use colors to pick out all of the different finite details, such as the different spinnings of the woodwork, and it just pulls everything out and gives it much more dimension. You can really see all of the detail that went into these intricate wood turnings and carvings. So, as I said, this book profoundly influenced my life, and it got me really interested in Victorian era architecture, which is something that has obviously been an interest to this day. Now, when you think of painted ladies, more than likely what you're going to have in your head is the Seven Sisters on Steiner Street in San Francisco, which is present day known as Postcard Row. These homes were built by contractor and developer Matthew Cavanaugh. His home was the Queen Anne home on the very corner with the turret, the only home that had a turret in this group that's very well known. And if you remember Mrs. Doubtfire, when Robin Williams is making contact with his ex-wife Sally Field, that little bit of dialogue, "Oh, Steiner, how lovely." So that street definitely has a reputation for having a large number of intact Victorian era residences that are often painted ladies. So this book is what really brought the term painted lady into the fold as a pop culture phenomenon. And after this book was published, what you began to see across the country is the spread of painted ladies. So the next publication was Daughters of Painted Ladies, and this is my very favorite book ever. This copy I have here, you can see, is beginning to fall apart. I've used this book so much, and if you're interested in getting inspiration for adding colors to your period home, I highly recommend picking up this book, or you could pick up their next book, which this one, again, also well loved and falling apart. This is America's Painted Ladies, and you can see how thick this book is. Lots of inspiration in this book as well. So I recommend you checking those out. So one of the stories that I want to relate to you that is one of my favorite stories about painted ladies involves this house on the cover here. So this is Hale House, which is in Heritage Square Park in Los Angeles, which is a collection of Victorian era residences and buildings that have all been moved to this park to be saved from demolition. And this house was moved there in 1969. They wanted to tear it down to build a gas station on its lot. It was sold for $1 from the city. It was inherited by the niece of the original owners of the home. And she sold it to the Los Angeles Cultural Council for $1. They moved it to the museum. And at this point, Ameritone Paint got involved, and they developed a partnership with Heritage Square, and they did an ad campaign. So this ad campaign centered around painting Hale House 39, as they say, non-clashing colors to showcase their new color tone system. So right here, I have an ad. This is from a 1975 issue of National Geographic, and this is the original ad that ran for many years. Now, this was something that when I was researching, the dates were a little fuzzy. So I estimate that Hale House was painted these 39 colors between 1970 and 1973. About 1973 is when you see your first print ad for this campaign. And it stayed painted these colors until approximately 1978. Now, this is also where the story gets a little fuzzy. There's an account where this was a partnership with Ameritone from the beginning, where they were at this agreement that they could use Hale House for this campaign and paint it these 39 colors. And then once that was over, there was the agreement that they would paint it back to its original color scheme, which is the color scheme that you see here on the cover of the book. And they did that through color analysis. They actually went as far as deconstructing the porch and scraping to find what the original colors were. So, and this is an example of what you would see during the Victorian era. You see different shades of green, and this terracotta and rust color combination that was incredibly popular during that era. So that's the one account that this was an agreement from the start that Ameritone would paint Hale House back to its original colors. The other account, which is my favorite, is the fact that this park where all of these homes are collected is right beside the Pasadena freeway. So you have a clear vantage point of these buildings from the freeway. And this house, painted 39 colors, caused such a stir of motorists on the freeway that there was an enormous amount of accidents. So finally, they decided that they needed to paint it something that was, of course, eye-catching, but maybe not that eye-catching, because it was just causing too much of a stir. So I just wanted to share that story with you. And there's another story that I love that's accounted in one of these books. When homeowners were painting their houses all of these wild colors, there was a great mix. Some homeowners were excited, and then some neighbors were absolutely enraged. And there's one funny account of an elderly woman sitting across the street when some young men were painting a Victorian in San Francisco, and she yelled across the street, "You boys, stop dropping acid. There's enough colors on that house already." So it was definitely a movement, and continues to be a movement, that has a lot of mixed emotions. And I'll go back to our friend Roger Moss here. He does concede when he discusses painted ladies that they do have value, because preservationists realized that paint was not a permanent thing on a building. It could easily be changed. And what this movement did was it made America appreciate and fall in love with its Victorian buildings again. It was much harder to continue this urban renewal movement where they were just tearing down all of these Victorian era buildings across the country when you didn't see them anymore. And when they were painted all white and gray, these buildings disappeared. But with this movement of these bright colors, suddenly these buildings were seen as hip and trendy and fun and new. And it made us fall in love with our architectural past again. So in a way, we owe a lot of gratitude to this colorist movement for preserving many of our Victorians, because it made them desirable again. And one trend I've noticed recently in Springfield, and this is a modern trend across the country, is we've become very gray happy. Everything is gray. And sadly, I've noticed a lot of our previously colorful homes becoming gray, which, again, paint is temporary, and I'm sure that this trend will pass, and once again, we'll return to discovering color. But there are some standouts in the neighborhood of people being brave and selecting fun, bright colors. And I will concede that maintaining a painted lady is not for the faint of heart, because it is a lot of maintenance and upkeep. Having very bright, rich colors, obviously the sun takes a toll and they do fade quite rapidly. So there is that to contend with. But we can still enjoy them and appreciate our architectural heritage and marvel at all the rich colors. And so hopefully you've enjoyed this little walk with me to discuss painted ladies. Again, this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. I love color, I love bright colors, and I love Victorian era architecture. So really, this is definitely my arena here. And if you want to learn more about Hale House, I highly recommend this book by Teresa Kumar. It goes through the complete history of Hale House. It talks about them actually moving it to its location, and it talks about the restoration of it. So I highly recommend that. I believe you can get it on Amazon. And then I'll be posting right here all of the books that are available from the Painted Ladies series. If you have any questions about them, I've extensively read all of them, so I'd be happy to chat with you about them. And hopefully you've enjoyed this. Hopefully you've learned something, and we'll see you next time.